Hey guys, tonight we're taking a very sleepy step back into the candlelit alleyways of Edo-Era Japan, where the nights are quiet, the bedding is stiff, and your neighbors are highly trained in swordsmanship and intensely repressed emotional expression. You'll be staying in the home of a mid-ranking samurai, which sounds impressive until you realize it involves a lot of sitting waiting and falling asleep at socially approved times. You step onto a narrow lane just as the sun dips behind the tiled rooftops. The dusty air softens with evening coolness, and the scent of grilled mackerel and pine ash floats lazily from somewhere down the street. Your sandals scuff the packed earth road, passing women in indigo yukata, walking home from the well a boy carrying firewood twice his size, and an elderly merchant quietly sweeping his doorstep. Above you, paper lanterns sway, already flickering to life. Edo, the city of shoguns and strict rules, is winding down. You take in the stillness, the sense of order. A low bell rings in the distance, nothing urgent, just a reminder that curfew is coming. And you realize this is a city that expects you to behave. Even your footsteps seem too loud. A guard strolls past in his long coat and wooden geta, nodding politely as if to say, "Yes, I know what time you're supposed to be home." The Edo Bakufu shogunate government kept a tight grip on nighttime behavior. Fires were a constant fear after all. Every house was made of wood and paper. So people were expected indoors well before darkness took hold, especially after the evening firewatch bell. Staying out late without permission, let's just say the consequences were not particularly restful. The sun finally sinks, and with it the final stirrings of daytime life. You can hear the doors of houses sliding shut, wood on wood, a soft and final sound. Even the dogs seem to understand it's time to go lie down somewhere and not make a fuss. You've arrived at the home of a samurai, not a grand daimyo in a sprawling estate, but a practical middle-class retainer whose duties include record-keeping, rice allocation oversight, and occasional sword yelling. His home is modest but tidy, tatami mats lined up like a checkerboard, scrolls neatly displayed in a tokonoma alcove, and a faint scent of sandalwood clinging to the doorway. You step inside and remove your footwear. Your host nods and offers you tea without ceremony. He has the kind of expression that says, "I was born frowning and have not yet found cause to stop." But there's warmth behind it, a quiet, structured kind of welcome. As you sit on the floor, you can't help but notice there's already a stillness in the house. No bustling servants or rattling dishes, no late-night snacking. The children are curled up behind paper screens, whispering softly. Even the dog, yes, the family has a dog, small, loyal, prone to snoring, is already halfway to dreamland. It's hard to say exactly what time it is. Time in Edo wasn't measured the way we measure it now. The day was divided into 12 hours each, corresponding to an animal in the Chinese zodiac, and the length of those hours changed with the seasons. Nightfall in summer might come late in winter, absurdly early. It's confusing but somehow poetic. You're not thinking in numbers anymore. You're thinking in shadows and candlelight. Your samurai host takes a seat beside you, sips his tea, and says nothing. Not out of rudeness, just comfort in the silence. Words are for day. The night belongs to the hush. It's around this time you realize something: you probably wouldn't survive a week here. For one, there's no electricity. That means no lights, no screens, no soothing white noise playlists unless you count the frogs outside. There's also no privacy. Paper walls mean your every rustle is someone else's bedtime soundtrack. And did we mention the curfew? Once that bell rings, you're in until morning, or you answer to the night patrol. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when folks are tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moon is rising above the tiled rooftops, and you're settling in for your first Edo night. Outside, the cicadas have given way to crickets. The occasional clang of a closing shop fades into the distance. The only light comes from a single oil lamp flickering in the corner of the room. Its shadow dances gently on the wall, echoing the slow sway of the bamboo blinds. Your host stands, smooths his hakama, and excuses himself to prepare for bed. There is no grand ritual, no elaborate winding down with herbal teas or mindfulness apps, just quiet efficiency. A mat is unrolled, a futon shaken out. The wooden pillow, a literal wooden block, is placed just so. It's all about symmetry, intention, and discipline. You're left alone for a moment. The stillness returns. Through the window, a breeze sneaks in, ruffling the edge of a scroll painting of a crane in flight. You're not sure if it's real wind or some ghostly leftover from a samurai past. In this moment, you begin to understand something important. Sleep in Edo wasn't just a biological necessity, it was a social performance, a mark of proper conduct. You were expected to rest quietly, rise early, and not bother anyone. Snoring too loudly, a faux pas, staying up late suspicious, napping too much, questionable moral character. There's something oddly comforting about it all. A society that tells you exactly when to stop, when to sleep, when to hush. No pressure to scroll through messages or doom scroll anything. Just this darkness, quiet, and the distant cry of an owl you hope isn't metaphorical. And with that, the paper doors close softly for the night. The house is so quiet it practically hums. You sit there surrounded by the thin, translucent shoji walls and realize you've never felt this particular brand of silence before. It isn't lonely, just deeply intentional. Like the building itself is trying to fall asleep, and you're merely its guest. You tiptoe down the short hallway toward your sleeping area, sliding one wooden door aside. The floor creaks gently beneath you, betraying every step. There's no hiding in an Edo-Era house, at least not from sound. Even the soft swish of your kimono sleeve brushing against a doorframe seems loud in this world. The sleeping chamber is simple. No bed, no closet full of throw pillows or mood lighting. Just a flat tatami floor, a neatly folded futon, a roll-up mosquito net currently tied back, and the infamous wooden headrest sitting squarely at the top like a polite warning. A narrow shelf holds a candle now burned down by half, and a folded towel you're not sure you're allowed to use. Your samurai host futon is already in place across the room. He kneels beside it, his back impossibly straight, folding his outer kimono with exact reverent movements. There's something almost ceremonial about the way he smooths each crease, as if the garment were an old friend that's seen too much and deserves a proper send-off for the night. Samurai homes, especially for those in service to the shogunate, weren't lavish. Despite what you may imagine from movie sets or anime scrolls, your average mid-tier samurai didn't live in palaces. Their homes were compact, wooden, and built for function. But that didn't mean they lacked style. Tatami mats weren't just flooring, they were a spatial grid system. Rooms were measured in jo, with each mat dictating the layout and function of a space. The architecture itself told you where to walk, sit, and sleep. You notice that everything is arranged just so. The futons are aligned perfectly. The candle is precisely centered. A decorative scroll hangs on the wall, an ink painting of Mount Fuji veiled in mist. Nothing is excessive, but nothing is random. Your host clearly lives by a code even when it comes to interior design. He gestures toward your futon, a faint incline of the head. You bow slightly in return. This is your bed for the night, a simple cotton-stuffed mattress laid directly on the tatami, with a thin quilted blanket, and yes, that small wooden pillow block that appears to have been designed by someone who once lost a duel to a rock. You kneel down and unroll the bedding. It makes a soft flapping sound that immediately feels too loud. You lie back carefully and place your neck on the headrest. The effect is startling. It's not painful exactly, but it does make your spine wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. The wooden pillow is meant to elevate the neck and keep your top knot or chômage from flattening during sleep. Not that you have one, but tradition is tradition. Historians still argue whether everyone actually used them nightly or just for appearances, but clearly your host is in the every night camp. A paper lantern flickers outside the room as a gust of wind passes by. You hear the soft clink of bamboo chimes, the rhythmic creak of a neighbor walking upstairs, and the faint murmur of someone rehearsing a no play next door. The walls are so thin they might as well be polite suggestions. In this moment, you learn another key truth. The samurai's day didn't end when he closed his eyes. Even sleep was something to be managed, balanced, respected. The Confucian ideals adopted by Edo society emphasized order, harmony, and self-restraint, and yes, that included how and when you slept. There were no sleeping in Saturdays for most. Rising early was a virtue, as was retiring without complaint. Across the room, your host settles onto his futon. One fluid motion, barely a sound. He closes his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing deepens into the soft, steady rhythm of someone who's done this 1,000 times before. You, meanwhile, are still wondering whether your neck will ever forgive you. Above you, a wooden beam creaks. A house gecko skitters along the eaves hunting for moths. Somewhere in the distance, a patrolman's staff taps the ground, a reminder that the curfew is real, and your choices are limited to sleep or respectful stillness. It's hard to tell how much time passes. You start to drift, lulled by the ambient quiet, when a sudden memory stirs. The household didn't used to sleep like this. Not always. In fact, pre-Edo sleeping patterns were more segmented. Many people practiced biphasic sleep, a pattern where folks would sleep for a few hours after sundown, wake up for an hour or two in the middle of the night, sometimes to read, snack, or even pray, then return to bed until dawn. There's some evidence that samurai, especially those with castle duties or young children, followed the same rhythm. Whether your host does or not remains to be seen. Still lying on the futon, you exhale slowly. You listen. And slowly you begin to realize that even the discomfort of the headrest fades beneath the layers of quiet. There's a kind of peace here, one that demands nothing but stillness. And just as you begin to feel yourself dozing off, something shifts. Your host stirs, slightly reaches for the corner of the mosquito netting, and pulls it down around his futon. He does it with the calm of someone sealing off a small, perfect world. The candle sputters and fades. You are left in almost total darkness. Your eyes adjust. You lie still. You try not to scratch your ankle because it somehow feels illegal. You remind yourself this is how people slept for centuries. They got by. They woke up with the sun and their posture was better for it. And somewhere in the next room, the family dog lets out one soft, contented snore. You awaken to the faintest suggestion of light. It isn't sunlight, yet not quite. It's more like the idea of morning, the sky outside, still a soft indigo, the sort of color that makes you think twice before opening your eyes fully. But your host is already awake. He doesn't leap from his futon like a ninja in a training montage. No, he rises slowly, deliberately, without a single wasted movement. The man probably has a spreadsheet in his head for how to sit up correctly. No stretching, no yawning, no casual scratching of limbs, just precision. The candle has burned out completely, and in its place is the pale blue pre-dawn light filtering through the shoji paper. It glows like moon milk, painting every object in the room with ghostly clarity. You're still lying on your back, clutching the quilt like it might give you an extra 5 minutes of comfort. Your neck, surprisingly, does not feel broken. Either you adapted to the wooden pillow or your nerve endings simply gave up during the night. Your host bows his head briefly, eyes closed, possibly a silent prayer, or simply a moment to organize his internal checklist, and then he begins the morning routine. In Edo, Japan, the day didn't begin with a phone alarm or the blare of morning news. It began with rituals. And for samurai, those rituals served as a daily reminder you are not just a man. You are part of a code. He stands carefully, folds his bedding, and tucks it away into a wooden cabinet. Everything vanishes into order, as if the night were a mere ripple in the neat pond of his life. You sit up, trying not to groan. The tatami mats feel cool against your fingers. You follow his lead, clumsily folding your own futon. It looks less like origami and more like a soft pretzel, but you do your best. He doesn't comment. The room is transformed. What was once a bedroom is now just a room again. Tatami, empty space, and the soft patter of your heartbeat adjusting to the waking world. In the adjacent chamber, you hear the quiet splash of water. He's begun the mizugori, the traditional practice of washing with cold water, often considered invigorating, character building, or, if you're honest, borderline medieval. Edo plumbing didn't include hot showers. Instead, samurai would cleanse their face and hands with cold well water as a kind of spiritual reset, particularly those influenced by Neo-Confucian values in Zen Buddhism. You try it yourself. A small ceramic basin has been left out for you beside the back door. You dip your hands into the water. It's not just cold, it's glacial. Somewhere in the background, you imagine your ancestors chuckling at your grimace. The cold bites, but it wakes you up. You splash your face. It does something. You're not sure if it aligns your chi or simply reminds you to be grateful for modern plumbing, but it certainly counts as refreshing. Returning to the main room, you find your host calmly brushing his hair, not for vanity, but because a samurai's appearance was considered a reflection of his discipline. He ties it back into a top knot with practiced efficiency. Again, you wonder how the hair survives the wooden pillow's tyranny, but some mysteries are not for us to solve. You're invited to sit. He prepares tea. The morning is still mostly silent. Conversation isn't rude, but it's also not expected. Mornings in Edo weren't full of chit-chat and scrambled eggs. They were structured, minimal, and often devotional. While the tea heats over a charcoal brazier, you notice a small lacquered box nearby. He opens it to reveal a short scrolling stone and brush. This isn't idle scribbling. He's composing a brief daily entry. Not a diary exactly, but a sort of meditative journaling, a habit encouraged among literate samurai. Some recorded dreams, others copied maxims or moral lessons. Your host writes a haiku. Historians still argue whether most samurai were truly poetic at heart, or whether this literary flair was more performance than passion. Either way, the poetry was real, and oddly it fits. By now, the sun is rising in earnest. Outside, the rooster next door sounds less like a majestic herald of dawn and more like a kazoo stuck in a wash tub. Nonetheless, it's the city's cue to start stirring. A cart rolls past. A gate creaks open. You hear someone thwacking dust out of a futon somewhere down the alley. You sip your tea, it's warm, earthy, a little grassy, and you let your mind drift. Breakfast will come soon, but don't expect eggs and bacon. A traditional samurai meal might include rice, pickled vegetables, miso soup, and grilled fish. Simple, quiet, functional, much like everything else in this house. There's a small altar in the corner of the room. Nothing grand, just a wooden stand, a few offerings, and an incense stick burning steadily. It smells like cedar and smoke. Your host bows gently before it, and you follow his lead. It feels calming. Not religious in a heavy way, but more like acknowledging a thread that connects each morning to something older than yourself. You both sit quietly afterward, letting the silence linger. And you think this rhythm, this deliberate slowing down, this refusal to rush, might actually be the point. There is no alarm, no rush hour commute, no inbox of anxiety. There is only this moment. Tea, light, floor. The sleep schedule of the samurai wasn't just about sleeping and waking. It was about a mindset discipline even in dreams, restraint even in comfort, and calm even when your pillow's a block of wood. Outside, the sunlight begins to warm the tatami through the shoji. The day has begun, but for just a few moments more, you stay seated, still, present, and you almost forget your phone ever existed. The clack of wooden Gita sandals echoes faintly from somewhere down the street. A vendor's voice rises in rhythmic chant, selling daikon maybe or freshly grilled sweet fish. It's still early, but the city is stretching its limbs. The castle town stirs in soft waves of sound like ripples over still water. Your host rises. You follow, stepping into your sandals with a small thud that probably woke someone 3 houses down. He doesn't react, only adjusts his short-sleeve Haori jacket and gestures for you to join him outside. The morning air is crisp, almost startling in its freshness. The street is narrow, flanked by wooden houses with low-tiled roofs. The breeze smells of wet wood charcoal smoke and the faintest trace of miso. A dog trots past with impressive purpose, pausing only to sniff a lantern pole with deep concentration. Your host walks with a kind of quiet grace that isn't quite stealthy, but definitely not casual. There's no swagger, just economy. Every movement has a destination. It's not performative, it's just how he moves. He's on his way to the guardhouse, you suspect. Maybe a patrol shift, maybe training. Even in peacetime, samurai held daily responsibilities. During the Edo period, especially under Tokugawa rule, most samurai weren't charging into battle or dramatically unsheathing swords on bridges. They were administrators, law-keepers, teachers, accountants with better posture. Sword in one hand, paperwork in the other. You, however, are not invited to the guardhouse. Instead, you're steered gently toward the temple quarter. It's peaceful here. The temples are small, but well-kept, their stone lanterns mossy and proud. A line of pilgrims passes by, heads bowed, hands tucked into sleeves. One elderly woman shoots you a glance, curious, not unkind. You're guided to a small garden tucked behind one of the temples. Here the rules of the city soften. Time slows. The moss beneath your feet feels older than most governments. A koi pond glimmers near the back wall, its surface catching the light like a silken mirror. And here you see them, other samurai. Some older, some younger. A few are meditating, seated in zazen stillness under the eaves. Others are practicing calligraphy, their brushes whispering across paper like wind through reeds. A few are simply napping, upright, eyes closed, completely at peace. Apparently, the midday nap was a sanctioned and respected habit, especially for those whose nights were frequently interrupted by guard duty or late patrols. Historians still argue whether these naps were brief moments of rest or full-on second sleep cycles disguised as meditation. But if the gentle snoring from the garden bench is any clue, the line was flexible. You sit down under a cherry tree. The blossoms are just beginning to fall, delicate pink snow drifting across your lap. The breeze sighs through the branches. Somewhere a monk rings a small bell, and you begin to drift again. Here in the garden, sleep doesn't feel like a weakness. It feels like a form of alignment, a return to balance. Samurai were expected to remain alert, composed, and resilient, but even they understood the value of rest. Not indulgence, mind you, rest. A younger samurai nearby opens one eye to check on his tea, then closes it again, unfazed. He hasn't moved in 20 minutes. You wonder if he's asleep meditating or mentally composing an epic poem about the carp in the pond. Probably all three. In this moment, you realize something: the samurai didn't just sleep to recharge. They treated sleep like another form of discipline. It was integrated into their day like swordsmanship or etiquette. You didn't sleep because you were lazy. You slept because you were preparing. And you didn't nap in a heap, you napped like a warrior might nap. Elegantly, strategically, possibly with one eye open, just in case. You lie back on the garden bench, arms folded loosely over your chest. The wood is warm from the sun. The stone lantern beside you casts a little patch of shadow across your legs. The sound of temple bells floats again on the wind, joined by the rustle of someone turning pages nearby. And for the first time in a while, you're not thinking about your phone, your emails, your snack drawer, or even your neck pillow back home. You're just breathing. Time begins to fold in on itself a little. The Edo clock system didn't measure time in even hours, it used koku and seasonal adjustments. Nights could be longer or shorter depending on the season, and bells marked the key turning points. Maybe that's why things feel timeless here, or maybe it's just the koi. You don't fall fully asleep. You hover in that soft in-between state, the dreamy limbo where thoughts lose their edges and reality goes watercolor. And that's enough, for now. When your host returns, he doesn't speak. He simply offers you a rice ball wrapped in bamboo leaf. You nod your thanks, eat slowly, and follow him back home. Back at the house, the sun is now firmly in control of the sky. The once pale morning light has shifted into that buttery golden warmth that makes even alley dust look poetic. A few neighbors sweep their doorways in slow practiced motions, while a child balances precariously on the edge of a well-being, scolded with the gentle tone reserved for things that happen every day. Inside, your host kneels beside a low writing desk. He's reviewing a small stack of documents, nothing dramatic, just scrolls, tied in tidy cords, notes, and what might be some kind of roster or ledger. You sit nearby, sipping the remains of your tea. Despite what films might tell you, the daily life of many Edo period samurai was about as thrilling as that of a modern civil servant, only with more layers of linen and far fewer coffee breaks. These were the so-called bureaucrat warriors, men who spent more time tallying rice stipends and supervising canal repairs than unsheathing their swords. And they took it seriously. Your host's brow furrows just slightly. He uses a small brush to add a few characters to a scroll. The strokes are precise, elegant, and quietly terrifying in their neatness. You suspect if he had access to spreadsheets, they'd be color-coded and blessed by 3 generations of ancestors. Then he stands. Work time is over. It's nearly noon, and that means it's time for something that might seem strange to modern eyes: midday stillness. He doesn't say anything, but the air in the house shifts. He slides the windows open, letting a slow breeze in. The smell of tatami ink and distant grilling fish mixes with the scent of cedar and old rain. And then, as though choreographed, he settles on the floor beside the central pillar and simply sits. There's no book, no task. He's not meditating exactly. He's not even watching you. He's just sitting. Historians still debate whether these moments were considered a formal part of the day's schedule or just byproducts of a rhythm that didn't require constant stimulation. Some call it an extension of Zen practice. Others suggest it was simply a culturally embedded patience, a muscle that modern society has largely forgotten how to flex. You're not sure what to do. You try sitting too. Your legs fall asleep after 6 minutes. Your host doesn't move. Eventually you lie back. The floor is surprisingly cool and a beam of light catches you across the ankles. You let your eyelids drop, not in full sleep, but a kind of drift. The Japanese didn't use our modern 8-hour block of sleep. Their cycles were segmented. In cities like Edo, where candlelight was expensive and dangerous, people would often wake around midnight for an hour or two, chatting quietly, writing, praying, sometimes even visiting neighbors. Then they drift off again until sunrise. This midday pause, it feels like a cousin to that nocturnal intermission. A little window for the body to soften and the mind to unravel. You glance toward the wall where a single scroll hangs in a wooden frame. It's a poem. Maybe it says something like, "The rice grows tallest in silence." Or maybe it says, "Please remove your shoes." You can't read it, but it feels right. Outside, a cat yawns theatrically atop a fence. A cart creaks by. The breeze picks up again. You finally speak softly. "Is this a nap?" Your host opens one eye. "Not yet," he says. Then he closes it again. You smile. It's hard not to admire the dedication. Even resting, he's kind of majestic, like a hawk perching with a to-do list. As the noon hour fades, he begins to stir again. He rolls his shoulders, once straightens his collar, and then it's time for the second meal. Lunch isn't wildly different from breakfast. Rice, pickles, some boiled vegetables, maybe a slice of tamagoyaki if you're lucky. There's a comforting monotony to it. No flamboyant sauces, no dessert menu, just balance. Samurai were expected to live frugally even when their status afforded them more. Meals were to nourish the body, not distract the soul. Of course, some samurai families bent this rule. There were records of lavish banquets, fish flown in from coastal towns, and dainty little desserts that resembled modern macarons but made of rice flour and bean paste. But your host, he is not a dessert guy. He chews with the stoicism of a man digesting both nutrients and the teachings of Confucius at the same time. You try your best to keep pace, though one of the pickled plums makes your left eye twitch involuntarily. He doesn't laugh. He just refills your tea. After the meal, you help rinse the bowls. The water's cold but not shocking. You enjoy the quiet routine. There's something soothing about tasks that don't demand efficiency, just attention. And then after all that calm, you hear it. A distant shout, then two. Your host sets down his teacup and stands. He looks not alarmed but alert. It's time for afternoon training. You follow your host down a side alley, one you hadn't noticed before. It's lined with slender bamboo stalks, whispering secrets to one another in the breeze. The city behind you seems to fade like a distant hum, replaced by the crunch of gravel underfoot and the low call of a mourning dove somewhere overhead. The path opens into a small courtyard walled off by timber fencing. Inside, a group of samurai, perhaps 10 or 12, stand in loose formation. Some are older, their movements deliberate and measured. Others are younger, all youthful energy and stiff shoulders. A few bow as your host approaches. He returns a gesture with a calm nod. Here in the heart of a bustling city lies a place of quiet, focused intensity. The practice begins without fanfare. Wooden swords bakken are raised and slow, graceful kata unfold like a kind of martial ballet. No barking instructors, no adrenaline-fueled yells. Just a rhythm of breath, posture, and presence. You're offered a wooden sword which you hold with the unmistakable grip of someone who once played Wii Sports and thinks it probably applies. It does not. Your host gently adjusts your stance, then leaves you to try mimicking the pattern, step, raise, strike, breathe. You're not good at it, but the point doesn't seem to be perfection. It's about being present. Many samurai during the Edo-Era practiced not only kenjutsu sword technique, but also iai-jutsu, the art of drawing the sword smoothly and precisely. It wasn't about flashy swings. It was about readiness, control, grace under pressure. All the things that modern life tries to fake with scented candles and productivity apps. You watch a pair of older samurai practice slow motion, dueling their movements mirrored like a pair of cranes dancing. No impact, just flow. It's almost hypnotic. A historian once wrote that samurai treated sword training as a form of moving meditation. Others argue it was deeply performative, a social display to maintain status in an age when real combat was rare. Historians still debate how much of Edo swordsmanship was practical skill versus poetic posture. You suspect the answer is both. After the kata, the group shifts into archery drills. A long, elegant bow yumi is produced. It's asymmetrical, taller than you, and strung with a quiet dignity that makes your own posture feel deeply inadequate. Kyudo, the way of the bow, is not about hitting the target, it's about form, breath, intention. The moment of release is supposed to be an expression of internal balance, or in your case, a humble reminder that the target is a lot farther away than it looks. Your first arrow sails wide somewhere into a patch of shrubbery where it will likely remain lost until the 22nd century. No one laughs. A few even nod solemnly as though to say, yes, the shrubbery too deserves to know fear. But then on the third try, you hit the straw-wrapped post. You're still celebrating internally when your host gently places a hand on your shoulder. It's time to cool down. Back at the practice courtyard's edge, you remove your sandals and wipe your face with a cloth someone thoughtfully provides. Your heart is still thumping, not from exertion, but from the curious dignity of it all. This wasn't CrossFit. It wasn't a sweat-drenched boot camp. It was grounding, like stretching a part of yourself that forgot it existed. Your host nods at the sky. The sun is dipping lower now, and with it comes the afternoon quiet, a moment again for stillness. Training over some of the younger samurai sit beneath the eaves, sipping barley tea and airing out their sleeves. A few remove their top layers and fan themselves with folded fans, laughter bubbling softly from their circle. You're offered a seat and a cup. The tea is earthy, cool, and faintly nutty. As you sip, one of the samurai tells a quiet joke, something about a drunk magistrate and a misdelivered basket of radishes. Everyone chuckles, but softly. This isn't a tavern. It's the camaraderie of people who spend long hours in quiet together. People who learn the value of the pause between sentences. A cat weaves its way through the group, curling up beside a sandal without ceremony. And there you feel it again, that sense that these warriors weren't living a life of constant alertness or constant violence. They were living lives of rhythm, of practice, calm, punctuated by purpose. It's in these spaces, the soft clatter of teacups, the breeze fluttering the ends of hakama pants, the low hum of a nearby drum being practiced slowly, that you begin to understand their sleep wasn't isolated from their training. It was part of it, part of the cycle. They trained to maintain their bodies. They napped to maintain their minds. They sat in silence to remind themselves of balance. And when night returned, they slept not just because the body demanded it, but because the day had earned it. You lean back, watching a dragonfly flit past the fence, its wings a blur of amber and gold. Your limbs are tired in that pleasant, satisfied way, and in your chest there's something that feels realigned. You wonder what comes next. You walk side by side down a narrow lane, the practice courtyard now a memory behind you. The light has taken on that late afternoon softness, where even the dust in the air starts to shimmer like it's been gently stirred by time itself. A merchant wheels a cart of fish past, humming to himself with the complete confidence of someone who has sung that same tune for 30 years and never once questioned the melody. Your host doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His sleeves sway lightly with his stride, and the quiet thud of your sandals on the packed earth is rhythm enough. You arrive at a small bridge no more than a few meters long, arching gently over what might technically qualify as a stream, but is really more of an ambitious trickle. He pauses there. Underneath, koi move like submerged lanterns, their colors just barely distorted by the ripples. You stand beside him, and for a while you both just watch. This, it turns out, is part of the daily routine too. Observation, stillness, a final mental alignment before the duties of early evening. Many samurai were students not only of martial arts but also of nature. There were scrolls written in the Edo period describing the importance of understanding the seasons, not just for farming or fashion, but for managing the self. Autumn was for letting go, spring for renewal, summer for discipline, winter for endurance and reflection. Your host points to a cluster of maple trees on the far bank. The leaves are beginning to bronze. Soon, he says, just that. Then it's time to return home. At the entrance, he hands you a folded towel and nods toward a small wooden tub tucked in a corner behind a privacy screen. You look at him. Bath. He raises an eyebrow. Of course. Ah, yes. The bath. Perhaps the most sacred of Edo-Era rituals that didn't involve swords or poetry. You're led toward a narrow wooden room dimly lit that smells like cedar steam and faint citrus. A metal kettle murmurs softly over a small charcoal brazier in the corner. The tub itself is square deep and clearly not meant for acrobatics. This isn't a Western bathtub with room for bubbles and existential reflection. You wash yourself first seated on a low stool with a ladle and a small bucket, just as your host demonstrates. Clean first, then soak. The water, once you ease into it, is hot. Not refreshing dip hot. More like mild baptism by scalding clarity hot. But after a few seconds, your body adjusts, then melts. Your shoulders descend by at least 3 vertebrae. Edo period samurai took cleanliness seriously, not just for hygiene, but as a matter of honor. Clean body, clean mind. And beyond that clean spirit, some clans even scheduled bath time with military precision. Others made it a communal event, a chance to share stories, compare scars, or just sit and steam the day's burdens away. Historians still argue whether samurai bathed more out of health concern or out of ritual obligation. Some say it was social polish. No one wanted to be the stinky official at a meeting. Others argue it had roots in Shinto purification. Either way, you're now experiencing it firsthand, and it feels less like cleaning and more like returning to a previous version of yourself. You rest your head against the rim of the tub, the wood warm and fragrant, and let your mind go quiet. Outside, someone sweeps the walkway with rhythmic strokes. You hear the clink of dinner bowls being arranged. A dog barks once, twice, then gives up. When you step out of the tub wrapped in a light robe and hair damp with steam, the world seems gentler, more spacious, like it's making room for you. Your host offers you a second cup of tea this time, Jasmine. Lighter floral, like the exhale after a long sigh. And now as the sun begins to dip behind the rooftops, it's time for one last task of the day: writing. You return to the same low desk from earlier, but now the ink feels slower, the brush softer in your hands. Your host sits beside you, unrolling a fresh sheet of rice paper. With careful practiced strokes, he begins to record the day's events, not in narrative form, but as reflections. Many samurai kept journals. Some were deeply personal. Others served as logs of weather patterns, political tensions, or tea preferences of visiting dignitaries. But more than anything, they were mirrors, tools for sharpening the mind, a way of sifting experience from memory. Your host writes slowly, pausing between characters as if waiting to be sure the thoughts are true. You try it too. Your kanji is questionable, possibly even criminal, but the process is calming, therapeutic. You write today, I held a sword, missed a target, and bathed like an egg in soup. It won't win literary prizes, but it feels honest. Outside, the last light fades. Shadows stretch across the tatami like sleeping dogs. You look at your host. He places the brush down, nods once. And you know it's time to prepare for sleep. The lamps are lit, small, flickering things housed in paper shades that turn the room into a soft amber cocoon. Shadows dance gently on the walls as you pad barefoot across the tatami, your steps muffled, deliberate. You're not told what to do next. You don't have to be. Everything in this house follows a rhythm older than memory. Your host gestures to a folded futon in the corner. Not a bed as you know it, with springs and mattresses and memory foam. Just cotton stuff comfort, neatly laid and aired earlier in the day under the sun. A pillow makura stuffed with buckwheat hulls sits at one end, slightly firmer than you'd like, but pleasingly supportive if you think of it as a headrest for a warrior. In the Edo-Era, the preparation for sleep wasn't rushed. It was deliberate. Shoes off, face washed, teeth cleaned with toothpicks made from fragrant wood kuramoji for those who liked a little minty luxury. Clothes changed into lighter robes, often cotton, nothing fancy, just soft and breathable. Your host demonstrates the folding of the outer kimono, placing it beside his sleeping space in a precise origami-like form. You try the same and end up with something closer to soft fabric sculpture, but no one corrects you. It's enough that you tried. You sit beside the futon and watch as the night comes to life. Crickets begin their chorus outside, a slow wave of clicks and chirps, blending into something soothing. Somewhere in the distance, a bamboo fountain, Shishiodoshi, knocks gently, scaring away no deer, but faithfully marking time. You didn't notice it before, but now it feels like the universe's way of saying, yes, you are allowed to rest now. Many samurai homes maintained a peaceful sleep routine. Contrary to the stereotype of hypervigilant, sword-under-pillow warriors, most Edo samurai slept quite soundly, especially during long peacetime stretches. Their swords by custom were placed near their heads, blade edge up, symbolizing readiness, but also protection. But in truth, these warriors often spent their nights in deep restorative slumber. Some historians believe the emphasis on sleep hygiene was linked to Confucian values, rest as a duty, not a luxury. A well-rested man made better judgments, avoided emotional impulse, and showed discipline through self-care. Others argue it was simply practical if you're expected to rise at dawn, train, work right, and lead. You can't afford to be cranky. You pull your blanket over you, surprised by how warm the futon becomes in seconds. The robe you wear is slightly scented, perhaps lavender, no, probably yuzu peel or hinoki, as was custom. Natural smells were preferred, grounding, not distracting. The ceiling beams above you are darkened with age. They creak gently as the house breathes. Somewhere beyond the paper doors, your host slides closed a small wooden screen and extinguishes one of the lamps. The room dims, but he doesn't lie down just yet. Instead, he lights one last stick of incense, byakuden or sandalwood. The smoke trails into the air in lazy spirals. It doesn't fill the room so much as drape over it. Comforting, earthy, slightly sweet. And then he kneels beside a small cabinet and removes something unexpected, a book. Bound in thread, worn from use, its cover soft with age. He opens it and reads silently. You try to catch a glimpse of the text, but see only swirls of kanji and a single faded illustration, a pine tree on a cliff. Samurai were known to read before bed, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Some read poetry, others history or strategy. A few wrote haiku about foxes they saw that day. This wasn't to pass time, it was in its own way a kind of mental flossing, a way to clear out clutter before sleep. Your host finally closes the book with a quiet sigh. He places it gently on the cabinet and dims the last lamp. Silence. You lie there, your eyes adjusting to the shadows, the scent of incense drifting lazily through the air. Your body feels heavier now, but not in a burdensome way. It feels settled. And as your thoughts begin to slow, you consider how far you've come today. From dawn rituals to sword drills, from sticky rice breakfast to deep cedar soaks, you've touched something real here, something unhurried, precise, and profoundly human. You turn on your side, the futon creaking softly beneath you, and then you hear it, your host breathing deeply, his rhythm slow and even. The samurai are not what you thought they'd be. Not just warriors, not just statues in armor, but people shaped by structure, by repetition, by simplicity. They honored the sword, yes, but they also honored the nap, the poetry, the tea, the silence. And now you do too. You're sitting still, so very still. Your legs have fallen asleep somewhere around the third paragraph, and your back is doing its best impression of an ancient pine tree. Before you lies an unrolled scroll, its calligraphy, whispering stories and instructions written long before your time. The candle beside you flickers with a faint, sooty glow, throwing long, soft shadows across the tatami floor. It is without exaggeration both peaceful and excruciating. The samurai seated across from you is perfectly still, stone-faced eyes, gently lowered, his hands resting lightly on his lap. He's been that way since the candle was a full inch taller. You wonder as the pins and needles creep up your thigh, whether he's actually awake or just meditating himself into a coma. This is morning reading time, an essential component of a samurai's disciplined life. After the early chores, but before breakfast, there's often a window carved out for quiet internal sharpening. The brain, like the blade, must stay honed. Samurai weren't merely sword swingers. They were trained to be literate, philosophical, and morally upright, steeped in Confucian ethics and military codes. They read classics like Hagakure, the Book of Five Rings, or sometimes just local government decrees explaining which hairstyle was suddenly illegal again this month. The room is cold. You shift slightly only to be met with the subtlest glance from your host, just a twitch of his eye. But it says, if you can't handle stillness, how can you handle a sword, a touch dramatic but fair? Still, it's hard to focus when your left foot feels like it's composed entirely of bees. The scroll in front of you details an old parable, a lesson about loyalty or honor or patience, depending on which scholar you ask. Historians still argue whether these texts were meant as rigid moral training or simply morning rituals to keep impulsive warriors too sleepy to cause trouble. After all, nothing disarms brashness like an hour of dry metaphors before breakfast. What's fascinating is how integral sitting was to all of this. The act of seiza, kneeling upright on your calves with your butt resting just above your heels, was both meditative and agonizing. To hold this position for more than a few minutes required practiced stoicism and a relationship with pain that could only be described as intimate. Seiza wasn't optional. It was seen as respectful discipline and proper. Wiggling or shifting could be interpreted as weakness or worse, disrespect. At this point, your entire lower body is trying to file a formal complaint to the shogun. Your host clears his throat, gently rolls up the scroll, and sets it aside with a quiet grace that somehow shames your whole family line. He doesn't stand immediately, of course not. He pauses, lets the moment hang like a kettle about to whistle. You imagine the scroll whispering, "Patience is a virtue," in your ear. Finally, with no creak from the floorboards, he rises. You try to follow suit. Bad idea. Your foot collapses under you. Your knee pops audibly. Your entire leg has transformed into something rubbery and untrustworthy. But your host graciously, almost imperceptibly, turns his back for just long enough to let you recover whatever dignity can be salvaged from a face-first meeting with a tatami mat. This is for the samurai in ordinary mourning. And as mundane as it seems, this quiet discipline formed the invisible framework of Edo society. While most people imagine sword fights and cherry blossoms, the truth is that much of a samurai's day was spent in such still, careful rituals, maintaining balance not just with weapons, but with words, thoughts, and posture. The seiza position wasn't just for reading scrolls either. It was used during formal visits, meals, even punishments. Sitting like this for hours could be a test of endurance, a meditative practice, or if you asked anyone over the age of 40, a form of legal torture. Of course, not all samurai followed this to the letter. Some found clever ways to avoid it. Hidden cushions, subtle leanings, or in the case of more rebellious sorts, a gradual slide into a more relaxed position under the guise of adjusting the robe. One diary from the era jokes about a daimyo who hosted his guests in seiza, just to see who could last the longest without fainting. Still, there was pride in the pain, a quiet power in showing you could endure discomfort with poise. Even as your spine sends messages in Morse code begging for mercy, there's a strange sense of accomplishment when you manage to unroll your scroll and read it to the end without twitching. As the candle burns lower and the scrolls are tucked away, you feel both lighter and heavier. Lighter in the mind as if your thoughts have been combed into a neat braid. Heavier in the legs because, let's face it, they've lost the will to live. Breakfast awaits, and so does the next challenge, standing up without groaning loud enough to insult your ancestors. You shuffle toward the next part of the day with the stiff grace of a puppet whose strings have tangled. Breakfast has come and gone, rice, miso soup, maybe a sliver of fish, or pickled plum if your host's household is feeling fancy. But now the house settles into a strange lull. There's still work to do, errands, training, paperwork, patrolling, but woven into the quiet rhythm of Edo life is a sleepy little secret. The nap. Yes, the noble nap. That soft rebellion against an overlong morning. You wouldn't think a warrior class would endorse such a thing, but here's the truth. Edo samurai, particularly those stationed in quieter towns or stuck in bureaucratic duties, often caught 40 winks in the name of practicality. The morning rituals started so early, well before sunrise, that by the time the day began for everyone else, a hidden yawn had already snuck into the samurai's chest. Now let's be clear, naps weren't officially sanctioned by the shogunate. You weren't going to find them listed in the Bushido code between be loyal and polish your sword with conviction. But diaries, letters, and temple records hint that short, unscheduled rests were far from rare, especially after morning shifts or extended night watches. Historians still argue whether these naps were seen as shameful indulgences or just another unspoken part of maintaining a functioning warrior-administrator hybrid. Some slept sitting upright, their backs against the wooden pillars of quiet barracks. Others made little nests for themselves, using folded robes in shaded corners. There's one particularly poetic description from a temple monk who noted a samurai fast asleep beneath a blooming plum tree helmet, still on mouth slightly open. He looked, the monk wrote, like a statue melted into the hour. It makes sense. Most people today assume samurai were constantly embroiled in sword fights or staring stoically into the distant wind, flapping their hari dramatically. But in reality, they had long stretches of monotony guard duty shifts that felt like watching paint dry or administrative tasks that involved deciphering poorly written merchant petitions. It was mentally draining in an entirely non-cinematic way. And for samurai living in urban areas like Edo, modern-day Tokyo, sleep deprivation could hit from all sides. Noisy neighbors, restless babies, temple bells, and those endlessly squeaky rice carts that always seemed to roll by just as you were nodding off. Pair that with the lack of coffee tea helped, but let's be honest, it's not espresso, and it's no wonder afternoon dozing became a stealth sport. Your own eyelids feel heavy just imagining it. The room's warm now, thanks to the midday sun filtering through washi paper windows. The faint scent of old tatami mixes with sandalwood from the morning incense. You spot a samurai in the corner, eyes closed, arms folded posture, dignified even in slumber. You wonder how long he's been practicing that pose. Probably years. There's a right way to nap after all. In some households, napping became a delicate art. Mats were laid out near shaded verandas, pillows aired out in the morning sun, and brought in just before lunch. Young pages learned to recognize the subtle cues of a tired superior. The deliberate stretching, the second cup of tea, the deep sigh meant not for drama, but for dignity. Only the bravest or most foolish would interrupt a nap in progress. Not everyone napped, of course. Some higher-ranking samurai looked down on it, viewing rest as weakness. These were often the same people who mysteriously developed ulcers by 40 and had poetry scrolls about enduring the burning hours. Others tried to schedule naps as meditation or scroll contemplation. You know the kind that conveniently took place lying down, eyes closed. And then there were those rare but hilarious stories of samurai falling asleep in armor. Yes, it happened, especially after night patrols or long guard rotations at castles. Imagine waking up with your face squished against a breastplate or dozing off while still wearing your heavy wooden sandals. There's even one account of a tired retainer who managed to snore through a ceremonial flute performance. The musicians were not pleased. Nap duration varied wildly. Some swore by the 20-minute eye rest method. Others indulged in full-on snoozes that left pillow creases like battlefield scars. One Edo period physician wrote that a midday nap restores the ki and cools the temper, though he also advised against napping immediately after meals, something about spleen energy and digestive harmony. You nod politely, then fall asleep anyway. By now, your own head is bobbing. You're on a bench beneath the eaves, your sleeves pulled over your hands like mittens. Somewhere nearby, a carpenter taps at a piece of wood, the soft, rhythmic thump acting as a lullaby. A breeze carries the scent of distant soy sauce and something slightly fishy, maybe eel, maybe socks. Sleep in Edo wasn't one long stretch, it came in pieces. A little at night, a little at noon, sometimes stolen, sometimes shared. You realize that in this quiet patchwork rhythm, there's a kind of grace, an understanding that rest isn't weakness, it's readiness. The samurai didn't nap because they were lazy. They napped because they knew they might need to be alert when it counted. Your host stirs, stretches once, and stands with practiced calm. He straightens his robe, smooths his sleeves, and gently nudges you with his foot. Not rudely, just enough to say, that's enough of that. Time to get back to duty, but you carry a little peace with you now, a flicker of stillness you stole from the day. You're back on your feet, sort of. Your legs still remember the nap, and your joints creak like an old paper door being slowly slid open. But the afternoon has begun, and with it comes one of the more curious features of a samurai's daily schedule, the structured chaos of patrol duty. Yes, it's time to hit the streets. Your host hands you a narrow ledger, a pair of thick-soled straw sandals, and a stern look that could slice tofu. You're going on a round through the local neighborhood, part security, part social call, and part high-stakes game of Spot the Illegal Dice Game. Not that you'd know what one looked like, of course. Patrolling was an essential duty for many low and mid-ranking samurai during the Edo period, especially those serving in castle towns. While the upper samurai class had land to oversee and administrative work to bury themselves in, many others were expected to maintain order on the streets. This wasn't glamorous swordplay under a cherry tree. It was more like glorified neighborhood watch, but with swords. The streets of Edo aren't exactly buzzing in the modern sense, but they hum with their own rhythm. Merchants hawk their wares from fabric-draped stalls. Housewives air out futons by slapping them against the railing, and children dart around playing make-believe with wooden sticks. You're not entirely sure if they're pretending to be samurai or ghosts, possibly both. You follow your host's lead. His walk is deliberate, almost too quiet for someone carrying so many layers of fabric and a blade as long as his arm. Every now and then he stops and notes something in the ledger, a merchant's name, a neighbor's complaint, a particularly creative pile of horse droppings. Contrary to the assumption that samurai were aloof nobles, many acted as local enforcers, community liaisons, and part-time complaint managers. Think police officer meets city hall clerk meets that neighbor who definitely judges your composting technique. They helped mediate disputes, break up fights, and make sure no one was selling salt under the table or running an underground kabuki theater in their barn. It happened more often than you'd think. One notable responsibility: fire safety. Edo was a tinderbox of wood paper and tightly packed dreams, and even a small fire could become a full-blown disaster in minutes. Samurai on patrol kept watch for unauthorized cooking fires, careless lanterns, or that one guy who thought smoking dried squid indoors was a perfectly safe hobby. You spot a man arguing with a vendor about the price of pickles. Your host glances over, but seeing it's just a pickle dispute and not, say, a kabuki actor in disguise, he lets it be. Historians still argue he mutters without looking at you whether this was really necessary or just a way to keep us busy. You can't tell if he's talking about patrols or the pickles. In more urbanized domains, patrols followed strict timetables. Each block had a designated patrol route and time slot. Logs were kept meticulously, but the system wasn't foolproof. Some samurai took their rounds seriously. Others used the time to visit tea houses or sneak in unofficial naps under temple awnings. Your host, you're beginning to suspect, belongs to the former group. He eyes a crooked shop sign as if it has insulted his ancestors. You pass by a bathhouse. The smell of warm cedar and soap hangs in the air. Someone inside is singing off-key. A small dog barks. The sun casts dappled light through bamboo screens. Despite the vigilance, the atmosphere is oddly serene. But even serenity comes with its quirks. Take, for example, the official patrol uniform. Some samurai wore their formal haori over lightweight summer robes, creating a look that was part intimidating, part sweaty. Footwear was a problem too. Straw sandals were cheap but fragile, and wooden geta made stealth a bit of a joke. Clack, clack, clack went the boots of justice. And yes, they carried weapons, but not always drawn. The katana and wakizashi, together called the daisho, were part of the uniform, but rarely used. More often than not, conflicts were resolved with a raised eyebrow, a stern word, or if things escalated by calling in reinforcements. It was a time when losing one's temper could be more shameful than losing a fight. Once in a while, a serious disturbance occurred: a brawl in the sake shop, a night thief caught scaling a wall, or some minor noble's pet monkey running amok. But on most days, patrols were a lesson in patience, endurance, small talk, and leg cramps. Your host stops to bow politely to an elderly man sweeping the alley. They exchange greetings about the weather, the plum blossoms, and someone's cousin's new carp. It's all extremely peaceful. You begin to suspect he secretly enjoys these walks. There's a calm satisfaction in keeping things just so. After 2 hours of soft footsteps and careful glances, you arrive back at the compound. Your sandals are now more twine than sole. Your host nods, once makes a small mark in his logbook, and gestures toward the courtyard. You've earned tea. The patrol wasn't dramatic. No secret plots, no ninja in the rafters. Just a handful of subtle duties that, stitched together, kept Edo life running smoothly. It turns out that maintaining peace often looks like, well, walking in a circle and occasionally frowning at a lantern. But in a world where one ember could burn a district and one insult could start a duel, a quiet afternoon patrol was something to be deeply grateful for, especially if it ends with roasted rice tea and a seat near the garden. The tea is warm roasted and toasty enough to coax your bones back into position. You sit cross-legged under the covered veranda as late afternoon light filters through wooden latticework, casting soft shadows like old silk across the tatami mats. It's quiet again, Edo quiet, which means there's probably someone shouting about radishes 2 streets over, but it feels distant. Your host slurps his tea, delicately wipes his mouth with the back of his sleeve, and gestures toward a bundle of scrolls resting near the inner wall. Time for the ledgers, he says, as if it's a treat. This, you realize with a slow sigh, is the part of the samurai schedule they don't put in movies. Not the swordplay or the poetry or the dramatic moonlit duels. Nope, this is the paperwork. Edo-era samurai, especially those stationed in towns or serving under a local lord, a daimyo, were often part warrior, part bureaucrat. And by bureaucrat, we mean part-time administrator, tax recorder, inventory, taker letter, copier, complaint sorter, and budget checker. Historians still argue whether the samurai class was truly an elite military caste by the 1700s or simply a very stressed-out group of middle managers with swords they weren't really supposed to use anymore. You unroll one of the scrolls. It's full of carefully brushed kanji neat as falling rain, inked by someone with steadier hands than you, and probably a deep love of repetitive columns. It records rice allotments from 3 months ago. You stare at it like it might sprout a plot twist. Many samurai were responsible for managing rice stipends, koku, the standard measurement of wealth. 1 koku was roughly the amount of rice needed to feed one person for a year. You do the math, then give up halfway and sip your tea. Your host explains how today's task involves comparing the rice records with the actual stock noted by the warehouse clerk. There's a brief discussion about phantom koku, a term whispered among bean counters, when inventory mysteriously doesn't match the books. Not because of theft necessarily, but because someone miswrote the character for 8 as 3, and no one noticed for 6 weeks. And if the ledger isn't enough, there are letters, official correspondence between domains, requests from peasants, reports from patrols, seasonal tax estimates, even weather records for some reason. The Edo bureaucracy loved its records the way a raccoon loves shiny objects, obsessively, indiscriminately, and with a suspicious gleam in its eye. Not all samurai had the same workload, of course. Higher-ranking retainers passed off much of the paperwork to underlings. But for the mid-level samurai, those with just enough authority to be trusted and just little enough power to be punished for errors, it was a balancing act of precision and patience. You ask your host how he manages to stay focused during such mind-numbing tasks. He blinks slowly and says, "It helps to have bad handwriting." Then they never ask you to copy anything. You're not sure if he's joking. The twinkle in his eye says yes. The fact that his brush is mysteriously blotchy says maybe not. Some samurai, particularly those with artistic leanings, took pride in their calligraphy. A well-written missive was a mark of refinement. Others, not so much. There's even a preserved letter from a low-ranking retainer whose writing is so bad modern scholars jokingly refer to him as the chicken-foot poet. The letter itself a complaint about ink shortages. Outside, the light begins to fade. The cicadas have swapped places with crickets. You hear the distant splash of water as someone in a neighboring home empties a bucket, perhaps in preparation for the evening bath. The day's momentum is slowing, edging towards stillness. But before rest comes one final ritual, the inspection. Yes, another inspection. Your host leads you through the storehouse, double-checking lock clasps, counting lanterns and muttering under his breath about the apprentices never putting things back in the right place. The swords, ceremonial and practical, are inspected for rust. The armor is checked, though rarely used. Even the spare tatami mats are noted in the log. In more prestigious households, this process could be almost sacred. There are stories of samurai who treated their inkstones like holy relics and their ledgers like scripture. A crease in the wrong place, disaster. A moth hole in a formal robe, catastrophe. That said, these inspections weren't just about pride, they were insurance against sudden visits from superiors or domain inspectors. There's one account of a samurai who was demoted because his ink brushes were too frayed. Another supposedly got a stern warning because his tea whisk was moldy. That one might be a little embellished, but you start eyeing the whisk on your host's tea tray, just in case. You help relight a few lanterns as the sun disappears behind the tiled rooftops. The courtyard softens in the orange glow, and the wooden beams above you creak gently with the shift in temperature. The paperwork is finally rolled and stacked, the brushes rinsed, the scrolls tucked away with the care of someone who knows they'll be used again tomorrow, whether they like it or not. Your host exhales a long, slow sigh that sounds like it's been waiting to happen since breakfast. He doesn't say anything, just nods once and steps back inside. And you sit there a moment longer, sipping the last of your tea, watching a firefly stumble its way across the yard like a very small, very confused lantern. You think about all the ink-stained fingers, the scrolls that smelled faintly of rice glue, and the odd satisfaction of checking a box next to inventory accounted for. Turns out even warriors need balance sheets. You don't realize how heavy your eyes have become until your host gently nudges your elbow and motions toward the corner of the house where the evening meal is being prepared. The aroma hits you before your legs can get moving. Grilled fish miso broth, something pickled and crunchy, and yes, rice. Always rice. By now, the house feels quieter, more muted. Not silent. Edo nights are never truly silent, but hushed in that respectful winding down sort of way. Somewhere, a bamboo water clock lets out its steady clack as the water shifts its weight. The neighbor's wind chime tinks gently catching the night breeze. Inside, your host sets out small lacquered trays and gestures for you to sit. Dinner for a samurai in the Edo-Era was simple but precise. Meals were structured seasonal and portioned with almost mathematical consistency. There's no heap of fried tempura here, no elaborate towers of sashimi, just a few well-balanced dishes that speak volumes through their restraint. You reach for your chopsticks. They're surprisingly light polished smooth from years of use. Your host begins with a quiet itadakimasu, a respectful acknowledgement of the food, and all it took to arrive on the plate, and you follow suit. The grilled mackerel is smoky and tender, perfectly salted. The miso soup has thin strands of green onion and seaweed floating like delicate ribbons. There's a small bowl of simmered vegetables, daikon burdock root, and lotus stewed in soy and mirin. Pickled plums that are both tart and sleepy. And of course, the rice. Fluffy white, subtly sweet, always just the right amount. Historians still argue whether the average samurai ate better than the common townsfolk, but tonight you're not complaining. What's fascinating isn't just what you're eating, it's how ritualized the whole experience is. Your host doesn't talk much during dinner. Each bite seems considered. He chews slowly, thoughtfully, as if listening to the food rather than devouring it. In Edo period households, especially among samurai, meals were an extension of discipline. Sitting posture mattered. Eating quietly mattered. Even the placement of dishes followed unspoken rules. And yet there's a warmth to it, a simplicity that feels oddly luxurious in its restraint. Like the culinary equivalent of a well-written haiku. Halfway through the meal, he pours a small cup of sake, not for himself, but for you. It's a mild gesture of hospitality. You bow, he bows, you sip. It's smooth and faintly floral, like spring rain trapped in a bottle. You briefly wonder how dangerous it is to drink when you're still technically armed. Your host seems unconcerned. Conversation resumes gently. He asks if the rice in your region tastes different. You admit with sleepy honesty that you've never really noticed before. He chuckles. You talk a little about sleep, about how strange it feels to nap twice in a day. He nods knowingly and tells you that even within the same class, samurai sleep habits varied widely. Some preferred short naps spaced through the day, while others insisted on rising before dawn and retiring early, an echo of more militant training. And then he says something curious. The body is like a bow, he murmurs, setting down his empty rice bowl. Drawn too tightly, it snaps. Left too slack, it forgets its shape. You file that away as one of those vaguely wise things old samurai say when they've eaten well and don't want to wash the dishes. As dinner winds down, you help gather the trays carefully, quietly. The dishes are rinsed outside with water hauled from the well and carried in bamboo pails. You dry each bowl with a cloth so soft it feels like breath. Everything is put back exactly where it was before. Then it's time for a final check of the house. Doors are slid shut. Lanterns are turned low. Tatami mats are shaken once more, not that they needed it. The air smells faintly of pine and grilled fish and the last ember of the kitchen fire. You help lay out 2 futons, thin but soft, layered with cotton sheets and rolled out along the wooden floor like sleepy scrolls. And then finally the robes. Nightwear isn't anything fancy. Just a plain cotton yukata, clean and loose and smelling of lavender soap. You slip into it sighing as your limbs remember what it's like not to carry your own weight. Your host changes, silently, expertly folding his day robes and placing them in a cedar drawer. No sword at his side now, just stillness. Before bed, he kneels once more before the small family shrine, lighting a cone of incense and bowing twice. The smoke curls into the rafters like a lazy ghost. He doesn't say anything aloud, just breathes it in, lets it out. The moment feels sacred, or maybe just deeply human. You follow suit, awkward but sincere. It feels right to end the day this way, with gratitude, humility, and the faint smell of sandalwood in your hair. As you lie down, the mat cool beneath you, the yukata soft on your skin. You can hear the final sounds of the day winding down. A rustle of bamboo, a dog barking one last time, the coo of a night pigeon, and maybe the whisper of a bowstring being unstrung in the dark somewhere beyond the city walls. The quiet is different now. It's not the polite hush of the afternoon tea break or the purposeful silence of dinner. It's the velvety, full-bodied quiet of deep night. A stillness so complete it hums like the inside of a seashell. You lie on your futon, one arm draped lazily across your chest, eyes half-lidded as the shadows drift across the shoji screens like forgotten thoughts. The lantern by the door is nearly out its light, a dim orange flicker trying not to disturb anyone. You can hear your host's gentle breathing from across the room, steady, unhurried, the kind of breathing that only comes from someone who's lived this routine 1,000 times. You're not asleep, but you're not quite awake either. That's when the scratching starts. It's soft, barely there. Not threatening, not alarming. Just a faint rhythmic scuffle from the wooden veranda. You raise your head slightly. Your host doesn't move. Cats, he mutters, eyes still closed. And sure enough, moments later, a fluffy black and white shape slides in through the half-open screen door like a ghost with excellent balance. The cat hops onto the empty zabuton cushion, circles 3 times, then flops down with a sigh loud enough to startle a cricket into silence. Apparently, even the neighborhood cats have a schedule. You settle back down, eyes tracing the beams of the ceiling above you. Your mind wanders, drifting like smoke to the way these houses were built. Edo homes weren't insulated like modern ones. The walls were thin, the floors drafty, and the paper doors hardly kept out wind, let alone noise. But there was purpose in it. The houses breathed. They were meant to feel open, flexible, adaptable to the heat of summer or the cold of winter. You tug the cotton sheet a little closer. Even with the summer air, there's a faint chill tonight. Somewhere a moth thumps softly against the screen. Sleep for the Edo-Era samurai was not a single uninterrupted stretch. Historians still debate the structure of these nightly routines, whether segmented sleep was the norm, whether people truly woke in the middle of the night to pray, write poetry, or stare at the moon. But plenty of records suggest that broken sleep, what some call first sleep and second sleep, was common, and not necessarily a problem. Your host stirs, sits up quietly, and pours himself a small cup of tea from a thermos-like clay pot left near the hearth. No light needed. No words, just the quiet sipping of tea in the middle of the night, as if his body is gently checking in with the world before returning to slumber. He sees you awake and shrugs. Sometimes the moon has things to say, he murmurs, eyes on the paper screen, or the joints just start arguing again. You chuckle softly. You're starting to understand. This wasn't insomnia as we know it, this was an intermission, a pause, a time when thoughts could rise to the surface like koi in a still pond. Some samurai use these moments to compose poems, tanka haiku, or simple notes to themselves. Others recorded dreams, sharpened their blades quietly, one would hope, or simply listened to the sounds of the city outside. Footsteps of patrolmen, the occasional cry of a late-night peddler, the wooden clop of Geta sandals echoing in the alleyway. You lie there wondering what kind of thoughts a samurai would record during a midnight interlude. Regrets haikus about pickled radish. A sudden realization about the weight of loyalty, or maybe just a reminder to oil the armor straps. Perhaps all of the above. Eventually, your host lies back down with a practiced sigh. The teacup is empty. The moon has apparently said its piece. The cat hasn't moved. You close your eyes too. The futon feels softer now. The shadows have changed their posture, relaxing against the walls. Even the air seems slower, more syrupy. This is the second sleep. And as you drift, your thoughts become less like words and more like ripples. You think about the strictness of the day, the order of it, how everything had a time, how the world ran not on urgency but repetition, not on ambition but duty. It was a life shaped by schedule but not smothered by it. A life where even the night had chapters, where it was okay to wake up halfway and just be. No emails, no pings, no notifications screaming into your palm. Just a creaky floorboard, a half-awake cat, and the faint sound of someone 3 houses over starting a kettle. And eventually you stop thinking entirely. Your breath slows, the air settles. And somewhere between thoughts of ledger scrolls and summer fish, you finally slip into sleep. Real sleep. You don't know what time it is when you stir again, but this time the light is different, softer, bluer. The faint gray of a world just beginning to blink itself awake. You turn your head toward the shoji screen and notice a pale glow pressing against it, the early hints of dawn. Your host is already up, naturally. He moves quietly through the room, folding his futon, brushing imaginary specks of dust from the tatami, and adjusting his robes with the kind of habitual grace that can only come from years of repetition. You blink slowly, still cocooned in your cotton blanket, watching him move like a ghost who's punched the clock for centuries. Samurai mornings weren't rushed. There was no shrieking alarm, no desperate coffee chugging while fumbling for keys. Instead, the start of the day unfolded like the petals of a morning glory, slow, deliberate, inevitable. You sit up with a yawn. He nods a silent greeting and gestures to the corner where a basin and cloth await. Cold water, very cold water. Washing your face like this, kneeling, splashing, gasping, just a little feels strangely purifying. Not comfortable exactly, but bracing, like you've peeled the fog off your brain with a ladle. After drying off, you're offered a cup of warm barley tea. It's nutty calming and just bitter enough to whisper that, yes, the day has begun. Outside, a rooster crows. Somewhere in the distance, a paper merchant is already setting up his stall. You join your host in a brief morning stretch. Nothing elaborate. Just a few arm rolls, a gentle back twist, and something that feels suspiciously like a lazy martial arts stance. Better than medicine, he says, patting his knees. Morning routines varied across samurai households, but most included some form of mental or physical tuning. Sometimes it was a quick round of sword drills. Sometimes it was seated meditation. And sometimes, apparently, it was just stretching with a smug little smile. Historians still debate how much of a typical samurai's morning was governed by military tradition versus personal preference. But one thing's for certain, discipline started early. Even if you were no longer swinging a blade on a battlefield, you were expected to carry yourself with readiness, poise, alertness wrapped in calm. The morning meal is simpler than last night's dinner. A bowl of rice, a raw egg cracked on top, and a splash of soy sauce. Tamago kake gohan. Stirred briskly, it becomes something rich, silky, almost luxurious in its simplicity. There's a side of pickled daikon and a miso soup reheated from last night's pot. No fanfare, just warm food to greet the day. You eat in silence, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled. Afterward, your host kneels by his armor chest, not to don it, but to dust it. He opens the lacquered box with reverence, lifting each piece of the cuirass, the arm guards the helmet. He checks the cords, the lacquer, the fit, then returns it to its resting place, polished and precise. It's a ritual, not because he expects to wear it today, but because it's who he is. The armor may sleep, but the samurai does not. You help sweep the veranda with a short broom. The bristles whisper against the wood. A neighbor calls a greeting. Children rush past on the way to temple school, their sandals clapping in uneven rhythm. A dog barks. A vendor cries tofu, fresh tofu, like he's selling gold. And just like that, the day has started. There are errands to run, ledgers to check, maybe even some letter writing to tackle if the ink hasn't dried up. Your host has a to-do list, you're sure of it, but he's not rushing, just moving forward, steady as ever. You sit back on the porch step, letting the warmth of the morning sun spread across your knees. The shadows retreat inch by inch, and the house feels alive again, awake, grounded, quietly ready. And as you watch the neighborhood stretch its limbs and begin another day, you start to realize something. There's comfort in rhythm, in the cycle of waking and sleeping, of meals and cleaning, of small gestures done with care. It's not glamorous, this life. It's not filled with epic duels or grand declarations, but it is full of breath, of presence, of little acts that say I'm here and this moment matters. And maybe when you lie back down tonight, you'll remember this day, not for what happened, but for how it felt. Steady, clean, human, like the echo of a bowstring finally at rest. And now as the last light fades from the paper screens and the floor beneath you breathes out its warmth for the night, you let yourself sink deeper into the stillness. The house has gone quiet again, not with the hush of sleep that waits for permission, but with the deep, grounded silence that comes from routine fulfilled. The cat is curled into a perfect comma. The teapot is empty. Your futon welcomes you back like a favorite story reread under a soft blanket. Out in the alley, the night air slips in cool and slow like a tide coming to rest. You don't need to think anymore. No need to remember all the tiny steps folding the futon, brushing the sandals clean, bowing toward the family shrine. You've lived it now. Felt the calm shape of a samurai's day from the inside. And you weren't tested in battle or waiting court or summoned by a lord, but still you've passed something. Not a trial, but a rhythm, the quiet cadence of a life shaped by intention. So let the stillness wash over you now. Let the breath come a little slower. Let the thoughts grow gentler like leaves drifting down to a pond that no longer ripples. You are safe, you are warm. And whether you dream of tatami floors or morning bells or of nothing at all, it's fine. The samurai didn't need fireworks. They just needed the next day and the strength to greet it with grace. And so do you. Let go. Drift. You've earned your sleep.